Hi, I'm Catherine Llewellyn, the host of the podcast. You can find out all about Truth and Transcendence on truthandtranscendence.com. And you can find out all about me on beingspace.world, where you will find my online coaching offering as well as my UK-based workshops. The Freedom of Spirit workshop for liberation and empowerment, the Pellower Radical Shift in Consciousness workshop for spiritual expansion, and transformational coaching for exploring the mind-body-spirit connection on the expansive path. You can also support the podcast by actually making a donation. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. Today, I'm delighted to welcome special guest Liam Wakefield, who, among other things, is here to talk about the innate ability to suffer. And in fact, there is a very amusing thing. Someone introduced me to Liam to come on the show, and I thought he was great. And then I was looking at some of his online photos and thought, what's my friend Emma doing in there? And so it turns out I already knew his sister, and this is very unusual in the podcasting world, that your guest, you already knew a member of their family. So Liam is a psychotherapist, a counselling lecturer, a writer, a musician, and a disabled veteran. And you can find Liam at liamjwakefield.com. And Liam is Liam and Wakefield is Wakefield. Liam J. Wakefield. And that will be in the show notes. So Liam, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for having me. I'm really, really appreciative of being here. And again, under the circumstances of a mutual friend, as well as not knowing the connection you had to a family member, which is really lovely. So it's a small world, but a lovely one. So thank you for having me on the show.
Fantastic. Yeah, that small world thing, I think I've become more and more aware of as time goes on, because there are so many people around the world trying to be part of the solution and trying to do beautiful work to help other people. So it's not surprising we stumble across one another.
Definitely not.
In different unexpected situations, but it's really, really nice. So thank you very much for coming on the show. And of course, you have a strong presence on Instagram, and, you know, your music is really poignant and beautiful, and you are working in all sorts of arenas and ways, contributing. And you're yet a young man, so who knows where things are going to go over the coming decades.
It's an exciting process, and I think for me as well, at this point, I spent so long in the military, 11 years, so I felt like I lost a lot of the youth that I sort of had. So I feel like I'm only just starting now, only really getting into entering this world of wanting to try different things and connect with people in ways that I didn't think possible before. And having lots of different, as you say, arenas to work from and operate in is such a lovely way of bringing in people to show what's there and what's there to be said and what I've learned from the journey that I've had. And I think it's an exciting time.
Thank you. Well, and I also think sometimes when we go through very difficult situations, our response is to close down. And you're kind of doing the opposite of that, which I really respect. And I think it's a really good example. We all have difficult times. I think most of us haven't had as difficult as some of the difficult times you've had. But I think we can all take something from that and say, am I going to close down? Am I going to regroup and open out from this place of new understanding? So, you know, good for you.
Nice.
I was going to ask you this theme of the innate ability to suffer. This was a piece of wording you came up with in the pre-call. And I think most of us think of suffering as something to get over with as quickly as possible. And it's nothing to do with an ability. So could you explain a little bit more for the listeners what you mean by the innate ability to suffer?
Sure. I guess when we look at an ability or a disability or something that bars us or pushes us forward with movement and motion in life, we often think that it has to be a positive driving force to get us from one point to another. But in fact, there is so much strength and power in the hardship that we can face. And again, it's you're going to move further in a ship with a strong wind if you've got a sail, right? Than a light breeze. And suffering can be that strong wind at times that really can propel you forward. It's just how you angle yourself amongst it. I guess for me, and I guess going through the things that I've been through within life, it's not to say I was always that way. There was plenty of years and plenty of times from childhood that I had shut down, and that I had gone so deep into myself that suffering was a prison for a long, long time. And it required me to look at it in a different way. I think over the years of introspection and self-reflection came the process of, I have to turn this into something, this suffering into something that is worthy and good and able to make me a better person, instead of becoming a product of the things I'd experienced, and that product being something really negative and having a negative affect.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess to circle back round to what you'd said, that innate ability to suffer, and to caveat that as well, it's the benefit of the innate ability to suffer, truly, because it is, to harness that and turn that into a strength, turn that strength into something that can become you instead of you becoming the suffering.
Right. So you are actually becoming then bigger than the suffering. You're drawing from the suffering rather than letting the suffering control you.
Yeah, it's rising with it. It's if you look at suffering in the sense of, let's say, a trauma. So when you experience something traumatic, it tears at the fabric of your soul, pulls apart some part of you that was once together, and it leaves a wound. That's what trauma means, wound. And that leaves its mark there. And what you do with that, if that suffering is just left there, it becomes a feeble foundation if it's not looked at and understood and then remolded into something that can become a strength. And I think when you take that with the full understanding of what it has done, but then know that you can become more because of it, it's just changing that whole narrative around that. And I can appreciate as well, working as a psychotherapist, there are so many things that you experience in regards to people not feeling that they can overcome something, but it's a narrative which we take that decides that. We'll have a triggers, and you can work through triggers and you can work through responses, but that innate ability to suffer, if you just look at it as an innate response and a trigger and you can't do anything because of it, that's one narrative you can have. But if you take this as an innate response to, okay, this is my opportunity now to rise through this and to face this, it doesn't say that it doesn't hurt. Of course things hurt. Of course things are difficult, and there's an emotional weight that's carried with this. But that emotional weight is a reminder of what we can go through and what we can become. Because on the other side of that is that feeling of, I did this. Look at me now.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've obviously traveled quite a strong path to be able to sit here and say something like that to me in this conversation. You didn't just learn that out of a book, right? So would you like to, for the listeners who don't know anything about you really, would you like to share a bit about your kind of origin story, your kind of early years, and some of what occurred and some of how that affected you and brought you to that moment? You kind of alluded to that moment where you said, or maybe it was a moment, maybe it was a very long moment, or maybe it was a short moment of choosing to not be controlled by the suffering. Would you like to give us a little bit of an insight into that moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to add something to that before I go back, it is a long moment, but the best way to look at it, and what I liken it to, is the old Greek tale of Sisyphus and the rock. And you're sort of destined to push that rock up the hill for no purpose, only for it to roll back down. And that is that innate suffering that I've faced. Again, it isn't just one moment, and it isn't potentially just one long moment. It's many moments of that pushing up the hill and watching it roll back down and having to start again, and then accepting that that's how it is, and it's okay that it's that way. And that suffering doesn't have to be one event that starts and stops. It's a continual thing that you get to face every time. So you kind of have to learn to love it, because we can all face it at some point in life. But for me, when it goes right the way back to the earliest years, and this is something that's always seen and looked through in certain levels of psychoanalysis, is the earlier years and the relationships to family. And for me, it was a very fractured one. I'm very, very grateful for how I was raised, given the circumstances, but it wasn't an easy upbringing. So in about 5 years old, there was a scenario where I was taken from the house and with my sister, and there was things that happened to us as children, which no children should ever have to go through. And I was very fortunate to have a father who then saved my sister and I and raised us single-handedly, despite the traumas and the adverse experiences we had faced through abuse. And what he gave us was love and compassion in a way that he could. And he's a phenomenal man. But even in that environment, there was no structure to the needs being met. There was no true understanding of what the children needed in regards to emotional capacity and love and family units. It was chaos, a beautiful, messy chaos at times, but it was chaos. And to jump forward a little bit, not jump forward a lot, a couple of years back, 3 years back, I was made homeless after a breakup and a situation where I would then sort of had to start all over again. And a military charity stepped in to help me out. And they're fantastic. And the lady who was on the other end of the phone and one of the workers for the charity said, you probably won't remember me, and this might be a little bit strange, but I decided to volunteer because my husband of 27 years had passed, and I wanted to give back to a military charity because he was a serviceman. And your name came up, and I asked if I could help with that case. And I said, okay. And she was like, I was your primary school teacher. And she's like, I always remembered you as the boy with the sad eyes. And it was around the time that everything had happened in childhood that created that environment for me to be, a very traumatized young man, or very traumatized young child at 5 years old. And she remembered that, and she remembered my eyes and how I carried myself. And from then on, I carried this pain and this weight and this suffering and this introspective view of that abyss. And I got lost in it as a child, and I would often just struggle with night terrors and often struggle with trust and my ability to handle anything. And it was really, really quite chaotic. And then I hit teenage years, and the chaos then was mixed with a lot of other hormones that just created a very self-destructive teenager. And I mean, vile to some degree. I mean, I despised a lot of myself in those moments because I didn't have any direction or any understanding of what to do in life with what I had felt and what I'd experienced. So I used it to just rip myself apart. And things like drink and drugs, and I found music, which was somewhat a savior, but at the same time, it became a catalyst as well to lean into every hedonic place that I could go that was just going to help feed a level of self-destruction. And it did a really good job of that, until the point that I knew I couldn't keep doing that without ending up dead at a very young age, because I knew I was using it self-destructively as a form of suicide, but just a very slow and reckless one. And I think when I look at that was a big thing for me to go, right, I need to sort this out. That's when I joined the army, and I joined the army at 18 years old. And by the time I'd gotten in and then went through training, I then deployed to Afghanistan very early on into that career. And then that was another huge change for me as a person, because I got to see a side to mortality and the fragility of life, humanity, in ways that most people shouldn't ever have to see. And that in itself tore the soul even further into smaller pieces. And by the time I got back, I'd lost all identity, and I knew I didn't fit into that military environment. I knew I was very different. That I was a guy who would be sat there writing poems and reading classic literature on Hemingway. And up to that point, I couldn't even read at school. So I completely flunked school. I had no ability to read or be in any form of education, because the level of trauma and the level of dysregulation in me made it impossible for me to sit and listen to someone. I was in a constant state of fight and flight, constantly, in every interaction I had as a kid. So obviously I then relearned everything I needed to when I first joined the army, like relearn how to read and write and all these things, which I'm so grateful the army gave me a space to be able to do that. But as I started to do that, I really started to reflect and understand myself in that. I understand that, oh, wow, okay, I don't have to be governed by all these things I've been through as a child. I can kind of figure myself out here in this moment. But then what I was doing, and now on reflection, looking back, I was mending a wound by creating a bigger wound as well. So I was trying to fix childhood traumas with the trauma of war. But the one thing, it's synonymous. It led into the other. The reason why I was pulled towards that role and the reason why I wanted to go and do what I did was because of what I had felt and experienced as a child. Chaos and danger were a comfort, a familiarity. And I found that again when I went to war. But the only thing then was then coming back to reality. It doesn't leave you a space to exist in or to fit in, because you're stuck in that state of everything is chaotic. And it was around that time that I'd gotten married and had kids, and having children was a big thing for me to temper some of the level of self-destruction I'd had. But at the same time, it merely repressed a lot, because I had to show up. It gave me an obligation to show up as a man and as a father and do the best I could. But it didn't help me to learn why I was being the way I was being. That was very much still left in the dark. And the process of that worked around for a few years until I got a diagnosis. And that would have been 2018, 2019, I got diagnosed with pseudoxanthoma elasticum and told I was going to be medically retired from the army, told I'd never train again, told I'd never exercise again the way I would. And I was told, I was going blind and that my life, I could wake up one day and it would be gone. And all of these really quite horrific ways to explain something. But for me at that point, I couldn't rationalize what was being said. And I know that a lot of what was said in a worst case scenario. But for me, hearing it just destroyed me. And it had undone the foundations of which I had built up around the experiences I had as a child. So all the pain I'd felt as a child, I'd then built this structure and framework of safety around it through the army. And then it had been removed. So what that did is it just, from a complex trauma perspective, it undone multitude of various traumatic experiences and left it all out on the table in front of me to look at. And inevitably the marriage fell apart and I isolated myself into a deep depression and eventually went to commit suicide. And that was the bitter end, to the point that I failed doing that and fell through the loft. And I remember thinking, what is going on? I was like, this isn't how it should be. What am I doing? And I had this moment of clarity. And obviously there's a lot more in the build-up of all of this. Is that decline in the mental state was so significant over the years. But to reach that point where I was at an end, I couldn't do it anymore, was such a moment of understanding that I had a choice, but I chose to finish it. I chose to end it. And I chose that, I didn't want to keep suffering. And then I spent a little bit of time away, which the army, again, were fantastic to look after me in that regard. They didn't know what to do with me. They knew my career was over, but they held for about a year. They really looked after me and put me through a lot of support and tried to get me the right kind of help that I needed. I wasn't ready to hear what I needed to hear. And what I needed to hear was that the work I needed to do was very deep and was a journey I had to take, and I had to do that. And it meant challenging a lot of what I had built up around me as a defensive mechanism. And a lot of this then came into effect recently in creating my own psychological framework and understanding of this around what I'd called the divisional self, and this wound, this core wound that we then build an armor around. We build this protective self around that wound. And then around that protective self, in order for it to exist in the world, we have to build a mask around that. And that's what had happened. Is I had then let the mask slip. I'd seen this armor and that cracked open and there was the wound. And it was then at that pinnacle where I either dealt with that or I ended it for good, because what I saw was too much to see without having to take action. And that's what I had to do. I took action. I think it was from there that I went on this journey of really understanding myself through self-analysis, really leaning into my studies and really trying to give back through that. And again, it was a long process. That wasn't an easy one. There was lots of trips and falls along the way. And even now, to sit there and say that, I'm suffering free and I'm pain free, or I'm not susceptible to bouts of low mood or anxiety, would be an utter lie, because at the end of the day, it's a part of the human condition to feel these things. It's just the acceptance in which we can with what we go through and how we deal with it. I look back on everything that I've been through and all the suffering I've been through, and I think there were so many opportunities, right to the point that I did want to end it, but I didn't. I did choose to carry on. I did choose to take that and push that rock up that hill one more time. And then I realized, that's all you have to do, is you keep doing that. And when you keep doing that, you can actually just figure out that it's fine. It's fine. Unless it actually does stop you. If you got the motion and you take that motion and you make it action and you build around that, you decide how hard that thing is. You decide how much that debilitates your drive forward. You get a choice. And it was in that choice that I realized that even in the lowest of moments, you still get a choice. You still have an active part to play. You still have agency.
Well, you do now as an adult, but you didn't when you were 5.
No. No.
It's a very different situation. And I think there are so many beautiful insights in what you just described. And thank you so much for sharing that with us, because that's a very difficult path. And I really appreciate you sharing it and making it accessible for us. I can empathize, but I don't feel traumatized by having listened, which I think is what we need, isn't it? Sometimes people won't share, or sometimes we don't want to hear the sharing because we don't want a kind of second-hand traumatic experience from it.
Yeah.
Couple of things I really wanted to highlight. One was the what you said about your father rescuing you and your sister, and how incredible is that you've got that. Is he still with us, your father?
Yeah.
So that particular presence showed, he showed up in that way, in that moment. And that's so powerful and such a gift that happened in your life. Do you feel that what he represented there is something that stayed with you as you developed as a man?
Definitely. I think without a doubt, there's the qualities that I like to think I have as a man and as a father and as a really do come from what he offered, what he created in that space. It's not to say that he's faultless. There were so many things that I've had to work on in the years that are attributed to how he is as a person, but the qualities, the innate qualities that he has, and also his innate ability to suffer. He suffered through it all as well. I think that's the important thing is as children, we're the center of our universe. We don't see outside of ourselves, and we're curious, but at the end of the day, everything revolves around us as children. And then as an adult, you look back and you think, well, no, my father would have been going through an immense amount of struggle at that same time. My sister would have been struggling. It wasn't all about me. And then you re-examine your experiences through those moments. You think, wow, what an ability that man had to push him through difficult times. It's so powerful. And yeah, that's something I definitely take from that.
And then you also mentioned the fear that you carried with you following that traumatic childhood experience, and how that fear affected you, and then how you exploded outwards with self-destructive behavior later on. And it just really reminded me of how suppressive fear is, isn't it? And it kind of suppresses us, but the energy's still there. It wants to come out somehow.
Absolutely.
So that sort of arc that you described really illustrated that very beautifully as well. Where you are now in your life, do you feel that you have actually managed to heal, reframe from that initial trauma? Or is that something that can never really be healed from or reframed? Do you feel?
It's a good way to put it, actually. I'm very tentative around the word heal. You know, much like the way a scar is formed. You know, it's never truly gone. It's there. It's the wound becomes a scar, and it's not like it disappears, but it does. Yeah, there's a level of healing that happens, but there is still pain around there. There's still somewhat of reactivity that is around that area, and I think we will always have that innate response to what we had been through. But then this is where that innate ability to suffer comes from. That, you know, that ability to go, I do have a reactivity around this, but I also have a choice around how I react to this. So if I'm to react, and absolutely a good example is a recent past relationship where there has been reactivity around trust. And for me being like, well, why am I struggling with trust? I know this person is trustworthy, but what is it about me that's not allowing that, and not allowing myself to see that? And that's a matter of perception. And I'm thinking about it and I'm reflecting, and I think, well, okay, I'm looking at it through the eyes of a child who lost the ability to trust those he loved. So that's how I'm looking at it. I'm not looking at it as me, as this rational man now who has an understanding of what I'd been through and an understanding of that person that's in front of me. So it's not that it goes, it still exists very much inside there. It's just the level of integration with it is what determines how we would show up to the world in the present moment.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's so powerful. And I can resonate with that in relationship to certain reactivities I have within myself. I remember I used to think, when I first heard this idea of clearing out our baggage, you know, clearing out our past unprocessed material, I got hold of this idea that, great, let's get rid of it all. How do I do that? So I spent years trying to clear it all out. And I realized, A, that's not possible. B, it would take me more than the rest of my life. And I would have no time for anything else, including sleep. So I gave up on it. But the way you've just described it, you know, as you say, it's integrated and it's held within a wider context.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
yeah, and people are so quick to want to get things away and cut things away and just get rid of it and stop it from happening. And I see it so much in my practice when people come in and they're like, I just don't want to feel this, or I don't want this to be a part of me. I don't know why I do this, and I just want to get rid of this. And you know, it's not an unwanted mole. This is something deep inside of us that we have to learn and to love and have compassion for. Because, an anecdote on that is somebody I was working with not too long ago was going through the motions with trying to heal these parts of them, and very much got to the point where every time it'd go wrong, they'd get really cross with themselves and they'd call themselves all sorts of names. And I sort of, we looked at the inner narrative, that monologue, and that the words they were using to themselves. And I said, if this was a child sat there, would you talk that way to the child? And they went, no, that'd be an awful thing to say to a child. I'm like, but that's what you're doing to your child inside of you as a child that is in effect when this happens. So if we look at it in regards to, I wrote this thing a while back called A Tear in the Fabric of Time. And it was the idea that when we experience trauma or suffering, innate adversity or suffering, say from a car crash or from something that stops time right in that moment and it tears right through. And then we go on and live our lives. But if you're to pass that place, you're pulled through that tear in that fabric of time, and you go straight back into that moment. Same feelings, same smells, same sensations, same everything, pulled right back into that part, and you feel the weight of that. The same happens as a child if you've experienced trauma, sexual trauma, verbal abuse, all manners of experiences that a child can, which tears in their fabric of time, that when they experience it and are exposed to it in later life, they are pulled right back to that moment. But when you're pulled back to that moment, so too is the state of the brain in regards to the language that you use. This is why people become inaudible. They don't know, they forget everything, that flood of cortisol that washes out the prefrontal cortex, and they've lost the rationality, but they become a child. They go straight back into that innate child sense. So when they then after on reflection go, oh, you're stupid, I can't believe I did that. That's like telling that child, you're stupid, why did you do that? And it's so powerful when you separate the two, and doing parts work within therapies, what I do in my practice as well, which is something I've learned, and it's been phenomenal. And to see that play out, to see someone communicate to that part of them and talk to that child or talk to that version of them that's talking down to them is so powerful. And it's moving. It's absolutely moving to witness that.
Amazing. I love parts work. I think it's just so awesome. But for any of the listeners who are not familiar with what that is, would you like to say a bit more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's, again, parts work is you find it in lots of different modalities. So there's many parts works from internal family systems, Gestalt use parts work, and it's about talking to innate parts of you. So for instance, when I had mentioned previously about the divisional self, this is something that I've been structuring around my work. So when I talk to people and work through parts work, we communicate with three separate parts with that, and that's their mask and their protective self and that wounded self. And then within that, we also communicate with the person, that authentic part of them. So a good example of that would be if I was going through a particularly nasty breakup and there was a constant inner voice that was saying, "Oh, I can't believe you're doing this. Oh, you know, you're so bad. This is awful. This is it." I'm really being hard on myself with that language. What I would do in that is understanding the origins of this genesis of why it's got to where it's got to. And if it's a childhood wound, let's say, from mistrust and not being able to trust, you bring that into it. Okay, so trust has been the thing that's destroyed the relationship, and the lack of trust comes from, let's say, abuse as a child. Right, okay, so we'll speak to that, and we'll bring a picture of this child in, and then we'll talk to that child. What would you say to that child in this moment that you're really struggling with a breakup? Okay, it's okay, right? This is understandable as to why you're feeling, how you're feeling, but we are safe now. We are doing okay. We're really picking ourselves up. We've done really well at work. You know, this relationship hasn't worked out, but, you know, you've got so many good qualities and you're deserving of beautiful love. And having that conversation is really powerful. But as it's being played out, I'll then say to the person I'm working with, okay, as you're saying that to that picture, what's the other voice saying in your mind? And they'll be saying, well, I don't believe it. You're rubbish, or you're awful, you know. And I'm like, right, okay, let's stop right there. Now I want you to change the seat, sit over here, and I want you to reply to that voice, the kind words you've just said to that picture, but only from that words of negative place. Okay, just speak from that place. And you watch as people will adopt a different demeanor. Their voice changes. They slump down. And I did it once within my own parts work that I had as a part of trauma therapy after going right the way back. And I remember doing it. And I remember having it recorded. And they said, "Well, can we record the parts?" I said, "Absolutely." And hearing it back, hearing this insidious voice, and when we were describing it with a level of symbolism, it was very much tar-like, and took this real dark entity that was within me. And I thought, wow, that's in me? That's awful. That was my response, was like, I can't believe this thing exists in me, but it is a part of me. When we're doing this, we're having these conversations and we're trying to understand the motivations of these parts. Why? Why is this one like this? Why is it being like this? And then when you go back far enough, you can then recognize, well, it had to be like that at one point to protect this wounded child. It had to create this armor around it. But the problem now is it's just been fighting ever since, and it's lost, it's decayed, and it's become cancerous. And it no longer serves a purpose of protection. And that defense mechanism only serves to trap that wounded child inside, trap that part of you inside, and lock you away from being able to experience love, experience the beauty and joy of life. And it's just working with that and working through different areas of that.
Amazing. And what did you say you're calling that approach?
So I've called it the divisional self. So the idea that we have that experience that causes this fracture, and it pulls that part away. And it's about, the purpose of this is to accept and to be able to create awareness around it first and foremost, and then accept what's there and the parts that are there, and then take action around integrating it. Because often, even when you bring this to light, and as I do in my own practice, I'll bring this to light and someone's like, and I had someone not too long ago that saw that and went, wow, that's, oh, I don't, I don't want that in me. And it's like, well, you can't just cut it off and say, right, it's gone. Because that is a phenomenal thing to use when needed in the right kind of way. And And our mutual friend actually discussed and showed me a lot with this. And it was a phenomenal moment when working with why I joined the army. Why did I join the army? What part of me wanted to do that? Because that then created a part of me that then had a strength to endure. And I wouldn't want to get rid of that. If I cut that away, then what's left? And this is the thing. It's about understanding what can be taken from parts with the qualities, parts that do have the innate quality to suffer, to go through hardship and endure that. But what follows isn't the negative affect. It's not the doing something difficult and then hating yourself for doing it or self-destructing at the end of doing it. It's about having love and compassion for yourself despite that and being like, okay, all right, we utilize the strength from this part here. And now we get to sit back into the comfort and security of our authentic self, knowing that we've used these parts for good.
Yeah, amazing. And it strikes me in the way that you're describing that. As you're describing it, I'm visualizing you doing that with a client. And I'm really struck by what your presence must be like in that situation, and the energy that you're representing in that situation that then provides the container where people can do that. Because, listening to your words, theoretically, everything you're saying makes perfect sense to me. And I've had some extraordinary parts negotiation breakthroughs myself as a participant. And I think it's amazing. But I'm also getting, you can't just necessarily do this on your own. I mean, you can if you're very, very, very experienced. You can do this on your own, but you can't if you're not very, very experienced. And you're obviously bringing something that allows, because it's hard to do first time off, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you feel it is that you are bringing into the space personally in order to support and allow that process to occur?
It's a good question. I like this question a lot because obviously being a lecturer as well within counselling and psychotherapy, it's understanding what makes somebody good at what they do. Can you just buy a load of books and learn it and then get a certificate and go and do it? Or is there something different? Is there a deeper layer to what's going on? And I think this is the thing that transcends the person, is the connection to something else and that what's being channeled through. And I think for me, when I'm in the practice and I'm working with somebody, I'm aware that there is something about how I interact with people and that relational depth that's created because of that, that makes the space accessible for them to be able to go into those areas. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have that connection, that right kind of connection energetically with the person that you're working with, you won't allow yourself to fully show up. You won't allow those parts to show themselves. And I think that's within my therapeutic practice is it's predicated on, is building that first and then being able to step into the space. I'd never have someone come straight in and say, hey, right, we're going to jump around from the chairs and throw a little bit of parts work in there. Let's see how we go. Because, and I mentioned it to somebody not too long ago, and I could see the expression on their face thinking, that sounds absolutely crazy. I'm not crazy. I don't have, I'm not. And this is it. When people are, when you're on the lay side of understanding from therapeutic concepts, the idea of having something else inside of you is an absolute terrifying notion. Like to think, well, I'm not schizophrenic. I don't have personality disorders. And it doesn't mean that anyway. But we do have many faces. We do have masks, and everyone wears a mask. Everybody. And it doesn't matter how much work you do, you're just taming different masks in a way that you can show up. You can still wear the mask and be authentic. It's just understanding how thick is that mask that you're wearing in certain moments. And I don't think we fully ever truly remove a mask. I think that
Right. I mean, you just reminded me of those 1950s movies where people had multiple personality disorder. And there's people screaming and, different voices coming out. And who am I talking to now? The kind of thing. And it was very exciting and fascinating. And and everything. But as you say, it did kind of divide everyone into, the sane people who are just one person and the bonkers people who've got all these different parts. We've come a long way since then, haven't we?
We have, and importantly so as well. I was reading an article the other day, obviously, that was in alignment with this, very much the case that psychotherapy, it hasn't had the greatest rap for a long time. Like, it's only recently people have now seen it as something that, well, actually, I can access this and I can do this without being seen as somebody who can't handle their own things. For years and years and years, I think people are so stuck in the idea that to have psychotherapy means, one, you'd either be very wealthy and being able to sort of go and lay on a couch and talk about what you're going through, which is inaccessible for most people, or you're locked up somewhere having deeper work done by somebody in a white coat. And it's not like that. And I think there's elements where that is a part of that, and being mindful of the level of psychiatric help is fantastic as well, because some people do need work on a different level. There are certain disorders which aren't accessible within psychotherapy or counselling, or certain modalities of that need something different. It's the same that goes into the discussion with pharmacology as well, and looking at psychopharmacology, and does it have a place? And people often come to the practice and they say, can I just go and take this? Can I just do this? And obviously I'll never advise in any fashion around that, but it's understanding that what I offer and how I do my thing, it's not all the same. Like, it's changing that narrative on what can be done and what can be accepted is an important part. And I'm finding more so recently that is kind of where I'm angling my journey now, is to say, okay, right, I'm not just going to do the same thing. I'm not just going to do what everyone else is doing and sort of be the generic integrative psychotherapist and I'll just practice this way. I thought, no, I want to take what I've done and been through, and I want to utilize that in a way that it really does make a difference in some way, even if to one person. And going back to that, what makes it work in the parts work is because I am okay with accepting and explaining that I haven't got it all sorted out, but I understand the parts that I lay down, and those parts connect, and it's important to be honest about that, and that level of radical candor that comes with that. Even on something like to come here and talk to you today about things like this, it's important, because when we talk about empathy, congruence, and from a Rogerian perspective, like we look at certain counselling perspectives and how people do the work, how real is it if we're not willing to even accept that, how much we struggle day to day and how much we have to face this adversity and this suffering? I think it's important to recognize that first and foremost.
Absolutely. And I just love the way tell me if I'm wrong, but the impression I get listening to you is that you are very, very clear about how you're prepared to show up and what you're prepared to offer and how you're prepared to do it, which means you're not going to be vacillating. Your clients can lean on you in the way that you are happy for them to lean on you, and you're solid. You're not floating about, wondering about how you can make sure your clients like you and are the regulators going to approve of how you're doing it. You're much more somebody who's been through the mill and found some really important stuff, had a deep dive dance with vulnerability and still dancing with it, which I think is the best way to be, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Now offering something very, very solid. Let's just remind people where they can find you, which is liamjwakefield.com. Liam, so fantastic talking to you. I've got a couple more questions I want to ask you before we complete today. Although, honestly, I could carry on talking to you for hours.
Oh, likewise. It's been absolutely lovely.
And I have spent many hours talking with our mutual friend, as I know you have. So one question which I like to ask guests is, if you think about all the people in the world who are currently doing their best to be part of the solution in some sort of leadership capacity, whether they are, therapists or practitioners, whether they're parents, whether they're running a business, whether they're a spiritual leader, or even if they're in a political role of some sort, that there's a lot of these people who are trying to be part of the solution. And some of those people are listening to us right now, right? Is there something you'd like to say to those people in particular in relation to the innate ability to suffer?
Yeah. What comes to me in that moment is looking at the level of authenticity with the suffering. I think we're in an age at the moment where there is so much going on in regards to people trying to help, trying to make a difference, trying to do their best into being a part of the solution. And it's fantastic. But then if you look at the numbers and you look at the stats, you see the decline in health and mental health within struggles. So there's more self-help books than ever, but there's more struggles around this. And so something isn't working. There's a detached element to those that are trying to help and those that are actually being helped. And this is an important thing that needs to be looked at. And I think it does come to the level of authenticity. There are so many people that are trying to heal themselves by helping others. And to some extent, I've been caught up in that too, deeply. And there's a word for it, iatrogenesis, where you make a mistake trying to heal someone else, and at the cost of it's huge. And that happens a lot in this world, is people really pushing stuff out, but the level of vulnerability gets manicured because it's, they're trying to not put themselves into too much defamation when it comes to their public standing and their appearance of what they're trying to portray. And I think that's what comes back to, I don't mind getting struck off. I don't mind getting shut down. I don't mind getting criticized for whatever. At the end of the day, I am somebody who's been through an immense amount of suffering, and I get it wrong so often. And I will show up every single time to try and make a difference and grow from that and change within that. And as you said, and be that pillar for people to lean on, even when I'm at my lowest, but understanding that it's okay and we get through that. But that has to come with a raw amount of authenticity and vulnerability and a willingness to accept that we don't all have it figured out. It's going to be messy. We're going to get it wrong, and we can't try and get it right all the time. We just have to do what is true for us, innately true. And within that suffering, the truth in that suffering is it's going to be hard and it's going to hurt, but that's okay. That's absolutely okay.
Amazing. I think perhaps some of us could do with having a little recording of you just saying, it's going to be hard, it's going to be suffering, but that's okay. It's absolutely okay. And just play it before bed every night in your voice.
But you're right. You're right. We get caught in an echo chamber of lots of different affirmations, but it confuses so many people because there's so many different things that are being said, and perhaps mine is just another thing that's being said. But I do truly believe if we stop for a brief moment and say, God, this really sucks. This really hurts. This is really hard, but I'm going to be all right. I'll get through it. Tomorrow will be fine. Maybe next week, maybe next month, next year, whatever it would be, I'll be okay. And that's it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Wonderful. So we've talked about an awful lot today, Liam, which I thought we probably would. Has there been a favourite part of our conversation for you today?
I think as a whole, I'm just very grateful to have that opportunity to be able to talk through some of this and be able to articulate it in ways that I feel is, something you said as well in regards to having these new arenas, these different arenas to be able to really emerge into the world with what I'm doing. And that's really resonated with me because it's something I'll take away from this after, is to sit with the idea that I am in a fairly early stage of this, though I've got years and years of experience of having felt through a lot of this and begun my work within a lot of this. But this is really the start. And I'm really proud that it's the start, because if this is how it's starting, then how it's going to be in a few years' time, I'm incredibly excited for. So again, I'm just really grateful for this opportunity to sit here with you and talk through it with you. And it'll be something that I will always come back to as being a poignant moment for me. And I'm grateful for that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, for me, it's been delightful as well, talking to you, because I can remember times decades ago when anyone who was in the mental health world did not have the degree of vulnerability that you're discussing and representing. Or in general, that there wasn't this very, very human way of embodying and being present with clients. So it warms my heart to see people, coming through who are really standing on the backs of, the ones who came before, who came before, who came before. So to me, that's part of what I'm into, the evolution of human consciousness and the evolution of how we support one another in that regard. So I very much appreciate you sharing that with us today. Really, really beautiful. Thank you so much, Liam. So everybody, thank you so much for watching and listening today. That's all for Truth and Transcendence for now. You can find our other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. Please do give us a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, share with your friends, and comment on what we were discussing today. Have a great week. I'll see you next time. And thank you again, Liam Wakefield.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. It really helps if you give a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, a review, and share with your friends. If you're looking for transformational coaching or an intensive transformational weekend workshop experience, I can help with that. You can actually help the show by making a donation. Until next time, take care.